Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne, a place where we have conscious conversations about things that really matter in our lives. And now here's your host, Roxanne Derhaj.
Hi, everyone. It's Roxanne Derhaj of Authentic Living with Roxanne. Thanks for tuning in again this week. This week, I have a colleague, Lisa Schmidt, that's with me today. We've been together earlier this morning. We spend, or have been spending, I would say, the last minimally 2 months together for an hour every morning through this this different time. So Lisa and I are presently involved in a writing group, which has been fantastic. We were just talking about the benefits that we've gained, and it's not just been a writing group, but it's really been a space where we get to share some phenomenal things with great minds. So Lisa brings a wealth of wisdom with her, and today we're going to just talk a lot about leadership, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about her background so that we could just dive right into it, because I can't wait to get into it. She's a seasoned coach, speaker, and leadership expert. She helps executives and organizations gain clarity and act with courage in crafting their powerful strategies, along with necessary culture that allows people to make meaningful and powerful contributions throughout their work. So Lisa, tell me, like, first of all, like, I know a lot about you, but obviously the listeners aren't going to know a lot about you. What got you wanting to work with leadership?
Yes. Well, it wasn't one of those things where, you're in high school and people say, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I would answer, well, I want to work with leaders. That was not my epiphany at the age of 16 or 17. In fact, it wasn't my epiphany until my late 40s, when I had enough experience in the workplace. And I work in organizational development. So I've worked in leadership development and in coaching. But it wasn't until I had enough experience in the workplace to see the impact over time of the difference between what good leaders, and I'll put good in some light quotes, versus less effective leaders, the impact on people around them, not just on the team's productivity or ability to create results, but on how people had a lived experience of the workplace. And I've always had this interesting question. I've had a question that's been interesting to me about this idea that professionalism is this sort of container in which, when you go to work, it's kind of a muffling of who you are. There's this idea of acting professional. And I've been very resistant to it, which I think has resulted in the fact that I now work for myself, because I find it very difficult to work in organizations when I can't bring my intuitiveness and my sometimes interrupting behavior because I have a great idea and I don't want to lose it. And also I'm in my 50s, so if I don't say it now, it's gone forever. But these workplaces where we're not like we're told, bring your full self, bring your best self. But there's so many leaders who don't have the capability to create an environment and accept that that's, when you invite that in, there's a whole big personality that comes with that. And so my interest in working with leaders is to really help them understand that they are not there to command or control, but they're really there to develop people and to create environments and to catalyze, I think, the best that people can bring to their jobs and to their roles.
And I think, myself as a young executive, in the culture that, I was thinking into my mid-20s, late 20s, the exposure that I had as a young executive is it was definitely very autocratic. And, and coming in, you're like, okay, well, what are the expectations of me in this new leadership role? But there was a part of me, and truly, I can think of myself, and I'm thinking, I'm the type that I'm intuitive and connected and like to be collaborative. And I remember in many of different situations where I was told, you need to be more autocratic. You need to be more dictatorial in your role because people aren't going to take you seriously. And I would be like, well, but I don't think I'm getting the most out of people when I do that. But back then, it's almost like I had to stifle that in the different companies that I went into in order to be taken seriously, obviously as a younger female at that time, but also in a senior role. And I remember struggling with it, but I kind of pushed it as much as I can so I could kind of fit. So is that kind of what you're talking about, you know, like leaving and I think the authenticity of yourself, kind of like, you know, oh, I'm Roxanne Durhaj, and then I enter the corporate environment and I'm this morphed iteration of something that people think they need to see me act as.
Exactly. And one of the things that I've noticed over the course of my professional life is this, there's a theatricality to the workplace. And so
Mhm.
just briefly, right? We wear business clothes or business casual, right? We put on our costumes and we use language in the workplace that we don't use in any other part of it. Like, who goes around in their personal life talking about low-hanging fruit or, you know, harmonizing the synergies, or I can't even think of them all right now, but I've just heard them my whole life. And it's like there's a script, there's a language, there's a costume, and then there's, you know, the act, like, you know, the act of change management, right? So we bring in a particular cast of people, and regardless of whether they have the skills to enact change, we need to be representative of different parts of the organization. So we do these things that are highly performative that I think get in the way of actually going, who loves to do this kind of work? Who's got some skill set? How can we make this work for people? What's the impact we want to have? But no, it's all like, you know, we enact planning, right? Because planning is part of, so there's this
Mhm.
part of, and what you described, Roxanne, is, you know, this, and I think what it refers to, because, you know, I've been in the workforce, I'm in my 50s, I've been in the workforce for quite some time, that there was this idea that was inherited from the military or from, you know, very patriarchal structures about what leadership meant, right? It was the, you know, the almost, I'm thinking like the man on the hill, or right, this idea that there was this sort of, you don't share what you feel, you know, you're commanding and controlling, as you just described. And, you know, when you look at, you know, the comparing coercion to getting people to do things versus an internal commitment to have an impact, it's the latter that gets really good work done. And, you know, you and I probably had role models who were telling us, ignore your instincts on working with
Mhm.
teams, do it this way. And so you're right, you know, we steel ourselves to go into the workplace and perform a role that doesn't align with our values, but of course we want to, you know, earn a salary. So, you know, we agree to this exchange, and then we realize over time that doing these things that are inauthentic actually erode part of who we are, and they exhaust us.
You know, I got to tell you this story. So I went virtual back in 2003. So at that point, I'd had, you know, it was four, sorry, 3 or 4. I'd had my son and I was commuting a lot. I lived here in Niagara. I worked in Toronto. It was, you know, now I think and I thought, where was my brain at that point? But anyway, the younger version of myself. And then I, you
Right.
know, had this young child and I was like, whoa, there's no way I can keep this up. So I, you know, I kind of was quite lucky to be able to kind of be the first iteration of being virtual. And at that point, it was like new, right, to the corporate world at that point. And what I had done, and I didn't realize, at least at that time, is I, you know, with everybody around me, so the accounting, you know, department and the IT people, I had formed relationships with all of them. Because I would talk to everybody. I would just, you know, I always say this is my, you know, this is my Trinidadian upbringing, you know, growing up in a small little island and things like that. So I really made a lot of connections. So in fact, so here they are, they're setting up the virtual and all of that. But of course, you know, with a, you know, a new system, everything went wrong. So I would call, you know, I'd call up to Toronto and I would talk to the IT guys and I would talk to the accounting people and I'd talk to marketing and I'd get all these things done. And other executives would say to me, how do you get shit done? You're in Niagara Falls. You know, we're in Toronto on Bloor Street, 2 offices over from the people that we need stuff done for, and we don't get it done. And somehow you were able to. I said, you know, at the time I was making these connections, I had no clue that I was going to go virtual. I'd already been in my position for about 4 or 5 years. And I said, it's really, now I realize I didn't realize what I was just being myself. So I could call up to the IT guy that nobody would talk to, because I would always talk to him and say, hey, Jamie, by the way, I don't know what the heck's going on here. Can you help me out? So when I would pick up the phone and say, hey, how you doing? Oh my God, I'm stuck in Niagara Falls and everything's about to fall apart. He would actually get to my item first. And now I realize that that's all it was, that because I was taking that extra effort, and I talk a lot about authenticity. I didn't realize that inadvertently, because I was connecting and getting to know him, and he was the guy that nobody saw, but was quite instrumental in running a lot of everything related to all the accounts everybody managed. He was very powerful. So I got these things done. So I would share that with my team after, and they'd be like, oh yeah, okay, that's just because it's you. It's your way. And I'm
But
like, no,
isn't that interesting? It sounds dismissive. Oh, that's just you, as opposed to relate to, wow, what could we learn from relating to somebody with respect and authentically connecting with them?
Yeah, and I'd talk about nothing, right? I'd be like, what do I know about IT? I didn't know anything about it. I'd be like, hey, what's going on back there? Because, nobody knew where the IT department was until you really, really needed them. So you got to source it. So I think, that's an interesting thing, because in leadership today, we know the power of, servant leadership and shoulder to shoulder and connection. And you said earlier, it's about connecting at such a profound, deep level that performance comes naturally out of all of us. I think of us, in our groups in the morning, and we all want to perform at our capacity, whatever that is. But it comes naturally out of us, because I think that's just the humanness of all of us.
I absolutely agree. I've had experiences in which I've coached leaders who had this strong bias to, well, if I'm not telling them what to do and I'm not checking in, how do I know that they're not, doing the things or meeting the expectations? And I said, well, what if you flip the conversation around and say to them, something like, what kind of leader do you need me to be? As just make it about, I don't mean make it about you, like, okay, enough about you, let's talk about me, leader. But what I really tried to help leaders see, what I try to help them see, is that, you are an instrument of catalyzing the ability of other people to be and bring, their talents. And when you flip it around and stop, the language of, what are you doing? Like, when you have those update meetings with your leader, right? Okay, what's on your list? What's on my list? I've never in my life come out of those meetings feeling that I've been seen, that my work is building towards something. They always felt very mechanical and transactional versus having a leader saying, listen, what do you need from me to be able to do some really good work on behalf of the organization?
Right.
Wow, that stops you in your tracks, because A, you've got to figure out what it is you want to contribute, and B, you have to ask for the thing that's going to make it even easier for you to do that. And sometimes it's these small things, Roxanne, that leaders they're not aware of the power just of their presence and of being able to create the capacity for other people to relate to them human to human. And to try, we are in hierarchies, but to try and, find a way to not let the hierarchy determine the relationship between the leader and the employee.
It's almost like to de-stratify it into a point. Yes, you're going to have your CEO and your different levels, but some of the most authentic leaders I've met made me forget what position they held in the organization.
Yes. That's a brilliant way of summarizing it. Yeah.
Right. And then I look at them and then I think, when I worked for Warren Chappelle, for instance, there's an example, and that was my beginning way back. Those kind of leadership at that time, was very, very, very hierarchical. And this was a funny story, but it's a story I got to share. And I remember he was getting on the elevator. So he still was, in the building. And I happened to be getting on the elevator as well. There was people jumping off the elevator because they were afraid to be there with him. And I was shocked. And I said, he goes, how you doing? I said, oh, I'm pretty darn good. How about you? And he goes, I said, this elevator got cleared quickly. He started to laugh. And he goes, what's your name? I said, it's Roxanne Durhodge. He goes, yeah, I know you. I said, I'm sure you do. And I just chuckled and laughed and said, how are you doing? And he goes, I'm pretty good. Just rode the elevator. But that was an example of, you know, and he was a nice enough man. Of course, you know, we didn't see him very often and board ran us, but how people were so fearful because he was the owner. It's unfortunate that that was the reality. And I'm talking back, you know, in the, you know, early 2000s kind of thing. And the ones that have been able to get to the point where they can kind of sit and talk with you and have those conversations really creates that, they create that vein that says, hey, we're just people, even though they might be in a, you know, a lot higher of a level than you. So tell me, when you work with leaders today, and I mean, we have so much we could talk about in where the state that we're in the time with COVID and, you know, Black Lives Matter, all those things. What are some of the most pivotal and important things for leaders that are trying to grow right now? What do they need to come in contact with to be able to start the process?
Yeah, my first line, it's a great question. My first line is, you know, and I go back to a title of a book I read years ago, is what got you here won't get you there. And what I mean by that, and I think this book, this might have been a book that I just read the title and I didn't need to read the book. I got everything out of the title. Similar to the book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. Don't need to read the book. But what I would say is where you learn the most, in my opinion, and this comes from my personal life, my professional life, and in working with leaders, is to kind of go where the pain is. Now, I'm not talking about, you know, deep psychoanalytic, let's investigate your early life experience. But what I mean by this is if you notice yourself feeling anxious and talking to a particular employee, or if you're feeling a sense of anger at something, like what is it that's happening? Because, you know, very much as you know about authentic leadership is very much it's self-awareness. You can't be real unless you know who you are to be that real person, to be that authentic person. And so what I think has been really important is that, you know, for the leaders who are willing to do it, is to not jump into solutions mode. Okay, everybody, we're all working remotely. This is how it's going to be. And to actually slow down and go, wow, like I'm feeling just as anxious as everybody else about, is my family going to be sick? Are our jobs safe? Like to kind of really go into the feeling and be present with the feeling. Now you decide what you share from there. But if you're coming from a bit lower, literally physically in the body than, you know, your prefrontal cortex, it actually enables you to be, I think, a little freer to shape things as they come up, as opposed to coming in with a big plan. And my personal opinion is 3 to 5 year strategic plans. They're not helping. They're getting in the way. I don't know how many times, and maybe your listeners have this experience where there's this big plan that unrolls and within 6 months something's happened and you have to scrap the plan. So I think with what we're experiencing right now, leaders really grounding themselves in what they're feeling and speaking from that place, as opposed to, I got to control it. I think that's kind of, I would say, one of the first things that I would work on with a leader.
And I think that would be a skill that would be scary for some people, because they think if they've never done any kind of awareness growth through coaching or anything like that, where they've already sat with, you know, what is it that this particular personality seems to aggravate me that much? Or, you know, if you've never really done any kind of reflective kind of work, I often say you have to put a gap in between you and the actual behavior and look at it and say, why am I having this huge visceral reaction to this team or this particular part of the business? Because I'm not aware of what they're triggering within me. And if I'm not aware, you know, I put meaning to it without the ability to say, okay, well, they're triggering that in me. Okay, what is it that I need to kind of do to stay present to look at things for what they really are at that time. And that's quite the skill, right? To be able to do that if you've never done any kind of, coaching or building or introspection. And I think, oftentimes we think of introspection, we think of that in our personal lives. We don't per se as much think about it in our professional lives.
I agree. And again, this idea that who we are at work is going to be this vastly different person than who we are in our personal lives. To me, what I find very powerful is when leaders understand that becoming a better leader is exactly the same journey as becoming a better person. To become self-actualized is a lifelong journey. And the more you understand, I mean, listen, we're all born with a brain that we didn't pick, right? We have instinctive responses, we have emotional responses, we have thought patterns. Some of this is just baked into us. But we also have an ability to communicate, to listen, to learn. And so we're able to make choices. And the more we know about who we are and how we show up and what activates our, whether it's our amygdala, I find injustice, when I hear something about injustice, I just, I can literally feel my body heat up, and I'm coming from my emotional brain. But
it's
then
it's lighting up like a Christmas tree. It's like
totally like all the Christmas trees. But knowing that my brain, like I have a thinking brain that can then start sorting and choice making, right? So what are the words that are going to come out of my mouth? Am I going to have, like a mini tantrum? Am I going to, hold myself back and say, what works best when I'm activated is to ask questions, because I know if I'm coming strongly and passionately, I might actually be silencing people. And that's the thing I think that is so important about really good leadership development, is you're not looking at leaders as empty vessels that you fill with skills. You and I could easily teach anyone to have a very good performance conversation. It's a skill set.
Absolutely.
The harder thing is if you think that because you're the leader that you have the final say. It doesn't matter how much I teach you to have a good conversation, you're still bringing a mindset of power over, right? So the real work of leadership development is to notice the way you show up, and as much as possible, see your role as catalyzing what is already good in other people. We know you got your chops, you got this position, There's something about leadership that I think is misunderstood, that it's not about I'm finally in control and I can make things happen. Really, true leadership is I have no control, but I'm going to create a container in which creativity, innovation, difficult conversations, all of that can happen in order to have the impact that our organization is hoping to have in the world.
And I mean, well said, because, we also, in industries, they talk about innovation and creativity. I was actually I had dinner with a dear friend of mine, and he was a senior executive. Within 3 years, I could absolutely see the change in him as a person. And the environment he left, is quite notable, in banking. My question to him last night, and I want to share it with you because this fits so
I'm very
well.
Curious.
And I said to him, "Do you think authenticity is possible in senior leadership?" And he said, "Roxanne, I'm starting to second guess that that's a possibility," because he said what he sees is that the higher people get, particularly, let's use banking as an example, there are such sometimes unrealistic expectations of growth. That what was happening in his particular environment is that people were dropping like weeds with mental health concerns, massive short-term disability claims, and people that are actually having nervous breakdowns at that level, with a CEO that was so disconnected that could only see the things like the tactical and the growth and those. And there was literally, I said, there's people losing limbs around him. I was joking around with my friend, and he was not aware. So that's my concern when I hear that we have such opportunity. And my hope is that based on what the world has gone through and all the things that we have, had to come to grips with in the last couple of months, that industries like that would start to be aware that if you're not able to hold on to your talent in this way, and you're impacting people's mental health, where's creativity and innovation going to go?
Great question. And you know what and I hesitate to say the word love, but I will use it. What I love about the moment of time that we're in, so starting with COVID, it became pretty clear, for example, that no, your job can't be done from home. Well, yes, it can, because if when push comes to shove, or virus comes to illness, we actually can get a lot of work done. Now, part of that, and the people I'm speaking with, they feel that they're working harder than ever. Because again, back to this performative nature of work, I always have to be like, of course I'm not going to be anywhere else. I'm at home. So, I know leaders who are more of the micromanaging type, they're scheduling calls first thing in the morning because they want to see their employees are up and at work, which is hard to understand, right? Like, people have very complex lives that they're managing under very complex situations. But I think there's a doorway, and people are now looking into that doorway and going, wow, like, do I want to work for an organization that, has all these beautiful values on the wall, but when it comes down to it, I don't feel trusted. I'm not seeing behaviors of trust. And then when you look at what's happening around, the very important work around racial injustice right now, organizations, many of them, they're putting out statements, we believe in racial equality, we believe in having a diverse and inclusive workforce. And then the workers are coming forward and saying, oh, you're saying that now? I've seen zero evidence over the time I've worked here. And so people, I think, are becoming very aware and attuned, and I think consumers and stakeholders, that what has often been said is actually not the truth. And there's always a risk of things sliding back, but I think there's momentum both around, how we treat people with respect in the workplace, but even the broader and more important issue of how we treat people is, some of my friends of color, I'm white, but my friends of color, my Black friends, my Indigenous friends say, yeah, it's going to fade back out. Like, we hope it'll stick, but we don't know if it will. But I'm hopeful. I think there's many things that are happening right now that we can't go back, because people and leaders have been revealed for their biases, for their way of, treating employees, for their way of behaving that is not about the human creative spirit, but that's about shutting people down. And I'm a big, big advocate that if you don't like who you're working for, vote with your feet. There are many organizations that are starved for the kind of talent that many of us have and bring and long to give to our organizations. And we don't need to really put up with leaders who are either unable to support us or who are, latent racists or bigots.
Yeah. And I think the time that we're in, it's like a exponential effect. We went into COVID, and then we had this, Black Lives Matter come all at us. So truly, I believe that leadership, there's an elevated expectation now of, all of us that, have done different roles, and now that recognize, wow, I have the capacity to do this from home. What am I bringing? What skills do I have? I think it's gonna, people's confidence in their capacities have increased. So leaders that want to attract and retain this top talent, they're gonna have to bring their game, and it's gonna have to start with them, truly, because
I totally agree, Roxanne. Yeah.
But that awareness piece, I think, sometimes, like, I'll have conversations like, I'm brown, for people that are listening or have never seen me. And I've had friends that I love to pieces, Lisa, that are white, that they don't realize, they've said to me, I said to someone, ask me what it is to be brown. And someone said, well, I've never thought of you as being brown. I said, but I am brown. And everybody start to giggle, but these are girlfriends I've had for 30 years, right? And I said, ask me what it was like when I moved to the little town that I live now, 33 years ago. Right. And then my friend said, so, well, what was it like? Because nobody had really thought about it, because the issue of color has never come up. I said, but I'm also privileged. I grew up in an affluent family, foreign students. I went to U of T, and you know what I mean? So there's a certain amount of, I'm going to put inoculation with the way I entered society. I said, but put me down the street slinging beers, you know, in the little tavern and see how that's and then that sparked things. People said, well, what do you mean? Would I be treated differently? I said, absolutely, I would be. Yeah. So and you know, we started, and then people were like, one friend of mine, she's funny. She's the funny one. She goes, oh, my head hurts. I said, you know what? If your head hurts, we're talking about the right things. Because we had never talked about it as girlfriends. And, you know, and I think these are the conversations that need to happen in our living rooms, with our friendships, around the campfires when we go up north, all those things, because I think that discomfort will start to make people realize, wow, I should not talk about it, even though, like you said, we have to go to the deepest pain point in order to create change, right? And my friends will say, my one of the friends, her husband owns a law firm, and she went back to the law firm and she said to her husband, we need to ask everybody if we don't know about their reality, but in very subtle ways. Tell me about you know what it's like for Ramadan, because I don't know. You know, what's that like? What do you do? Like, how is that time different? All those things. So even though that was uncomfortable conversation, you know, that nobody wanted to have, because we hadn't really thought about it before, truly, we joke around, you know, but nothing big. It forced us, you know, to really get real. And I said to my one friend, I'm so impressed that we could actually sit through this, because it shows me that, unfortunately, something that horrific caused us to have these conversations, but we're going to make a difference in our little pods here in little, you know, kind of suburbia. And so, you know, to your point, we are in such, this time in history is going to be looked back at and going to be written on. Our ancestors will look at it and say, wow, you know, my great grandma or whatever lived in that time. So I think we have duty to really make a difference with what we can do around us in our little concentric circles.
Yes, and just to kind of pull the two together, there are many white leaders who are terrified of stepping into even simple conversations around difference. And, you know, just to give a little bit of perspective, you know, we live in Canada. Our holidays are typically around Christian, right? Easter and Christmas. You know, Thanksgiving being the harvest that goes with the Western calendar. You know, Simcoe Day, there's some white guy, I don't know what he did, but he did something in Ontario. May long weekend, the Queen, right? We don't question that you know, our entire structure and thinking around long weekends is actually deeply embedded in white Western culture. And people of color don't always feel comfortable saying, hey, I'd like to have some time off at Yom Kippur, or, you know, at Eid, it's falling on a, you know, weekday. Like we expect people to ask for these things, but we don't realize the privilege we have. We never have to ask for the time off, as you know.
Can I have can I have Thanksgiving off, or you know, Labor Day? We don't even think about
or
that.
Holy,
we just
right? Or there's so many, right? I mean, there's many cultures, and you know, and leaders often just a little thing like that, like just understanding, gives them a perspective that, and their whole people's whole lives are affected by little things like this. And helping leaders have conversations that are, you know, what people might deem as difficult or uncomfortable often starts with what I said earlier. What am I feeling? Right? So if you're feeling discomfort or fear, that's where you start the conversation. You say, I really want to talk about this and learn, but I'm just feeling like my stomach is in knots. I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. I'm afraid of being called out for behavior. Like that is a doorway into a difficult conversation. As opposed to, okay, everybody, we're sending everyone off for diversity and inclusion training or unconscious bias training. I have been in those trainings, Roxanne, many times over my career as a leader, right? A leadership cohort. And I can tell you, I learned some information, but nothing touched my heart. And what I think is happening now is people are having visceral reactions to what we're witnessing and feeling, and people are stepping forward and telling their stories. And that is touching us and touching leaders in a way that I think we have a responsibility to create the space for those stories.
I think it's truly an opening, as much as it's been such, it's made us rethink so many things in life. We're at an opening to make massive change, just in all of our lives, but also in organizations that we'd work with, right? To really, and I even think of myself when I worked in corporate, a lot of my colleagues were Jewish, and I didn't know anything. I didn't ask because I didn't know, and I didn't know, what they were doing. So even for me, I think I was remiss in not asking the questions. My bosses were Jewish, and I knew they were taking different time off, but I didn't say, so tell me a little bit more, right? I don't know much about it. So I think for me, even it shows me that I need to understand when I don't get it, like tell me about your background, whatever that background is, because that really gets me to a level where I understand people even that much more. Because the assumption is you look a certain way, Lisa, or I look a certain way, that I somehow know about your background, but that says nothing about you, unless
Exactly.
I start to have those conversations. So I think the level of conversation has to be shifted, but it has to be the permission, which unfortunately this adverse situation has given us permission, but that's what's going to create systemic change.
Exactly. And listen, conversation, like a tough conversation is nothing compared to seeing people in your community, your siblings, your parents, your friends, your children, be victims of police violence, discrimination, not getting promotions. Like, me feeling uncomfortable having a conversation really, is hardly a drop in the bucket of the way more important, a full bucket of really important things that we need to get to. And, I believe that like if you're going to step into a role as a leader, lead. Don't hide in your office. Don't, like these are people's lives, is what I say. Like, this is all we have. All each of us have is a life. And leaders, I believe, have a responsibility to create opportunities in the same way that parents with their children, you create opportunities for growth, for learning, for emotional expression. And I think, workplaces, the good workplaces with powerful leaders, I've used the word before, catalysts, but stewards. They're there to create an environment in which the human spirit, through work, contribution, can bring something. And, a lot of what happens in workplaces, we focus on results, but I think just as important is what we create in terms of relationships and connection. That, to me, fine, we put numbers on a spreadsheet. This is how much we sell and this and that. And, but there is something that is absolutely priceless that cannot be replicated on a spreadsheet, which is how people come together to create unbelievably important value just in the connection and the ability to work together, which to me is why I'm passionate about leadership, is that leaders have, again, there's such an incredible opportunity to bring what is the best in other people to life. And what a gift. To be a good leader is a gift. To have a good leader.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think in my career, I've been privileged to work with some phenomenal leaders. And I've also seen leaders that I think, oh my God, how did I get myself into this one? And how do I get out of it? And you kind of try your best, right? And then you do your best that you can to get through it. Now, Lisa, you are, you work with culture. So I wanted to really kind of wrap it into culture and what kind of things. We know leaders have to be aware, they have to have difficult conversations. But in reference to culture, and let's face it, we'll go back into phase 3, and we're going to be opening up, and we're going to go back to our lives, in whatever sense of the word, but culture is going to be shifted. So again, if I'm the employee or I'm the leader and I'm going back in, what should my expectations be as an employee? And what should I kind of be looking for in leadership in this new stage?
I saw some graffiti the other day, which was in quotes, I can't wait to get back to normal. And then below it, somebody had written, normal is what got us into this mess. And, whether it's environmentally, relation to the virus, or, to think about this in the context of the workplace. we have toxic and unhealthy workplaces because that's what we think is normal. And I would hope people who have terrible food allergies go on a nation diet. So you add a little bit of milk, or you add, right, other things into the mix, and you figure out what works and what's healthy. And so I would like to think of organizations, if they're looking at their culture, it's like, okay, we've pushed everything out into remote working. As we come back, what are the things we're going to test one by one to see if they're part of who we want to be going forward? And, you know, basically it's a fancy way of saying a stop, start, continue exercise for those of us who, you know, who do organizational development and facilitation. What are the things that we haven't been doing that we've learned we need to do because we're all healthier and happier? Maybe we have more remote working options. What are the things that we've done that are really, really well? And let's keep doing those. But what have we learned is just so useless that we're just going to stop. We're not in the culture going forward. We're not bringing them back. And, you know, just some thoughtful conversations around that, I think would make a huge difference to people. I mean, you know, even just the idea of, like, most of us sit at computers all day long. The amount of money people spend on clothing for the workplace. I'm just as productive in a pair of jeans as I am in, you know, something that fits a little too tightly, because of course, you know, many of us have gained weight over this COVID. I'm just as productive in yoga pants, and maybe even more. You know, can we drop this idea that there's something that's about professional attire if none of us are actually, you know, needing to be those things? Now, I'm not saying, you know, stop brushing your teeth, and, you know, there's some certain things that, you know, in the continue list, we want to continue, but what are the things, and maybe the, you know, like, that frees up people. Like, let's go to the core of what it means to be human, as opposed to these strictures that we call culture. That's one thing. And I'll quickly say something else. And I touched on it earlier. I can't tell you how many organizations I've walked in the door and they've got their values painted on the wall or in a big frame. And, you know, typically they're around excellence, integrity, inclusion, collaboration. And all I need to do is sit in a few meetings to see how true people are to those values. I would like to see organizations look at who they are, and did, in fact, they live up to who they said they were, right? And for employees to actually call it out. And to say, you know, we've always said that we're quite collaborative, but actually during COVID, a bunch of decisions were made and nobody was consulted. Can we actually claim that as one of our values? And those are difficult, courageous conversations to have with leaders, because you can get named a troublemaker pretty quickly if you question organizational values and behaviors, which is probably another reason why I work for myself, because I've been someone who's raised those questions.
But I think going back to those values and those missions and those visions that people create, I think that's a good space for companies to start to go back to, right? Like,
I agree.
Where are we? Who are we? And if we're not who we want to be, how can we slowly, you're not going to change everything tomorrow, but in pivoting back, you know, so what can we take with us, or what we learned about ourselves individually, collectively, and as an organization? And what has a leader learned? And then what has everybody through the different ranks learned? And if they can get to that point where they, like you're right, have this would be very strategic, but it'll also be courageous, because people are going to hear things that they're not going to want to hear, that are real, that probably has lived and been breathing in that organization for very long. But if they can get to that point and make some of those huge changes, you know, you probably retain 95% of the people that you want to retain, and lose maybe the 5% that it doesn't fit, versus it being the other way. Because we're probably going to see a lot of shifting with a lot of talent as we go, I would think. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
I totally agree. And I think the other thing is, now that we know that remote work can be very effective, your talent pool is so much larger now. You don't have to hire people in your geographic region. Like, you can reach into the, you know, the entire planet and find really talented people to work with. So I think there can be a real advantage to organizations. And the other thing is, you know, if leaders have been less than authentic and less than transformational, there's a beautiful opportunity again to go back to their teams and their organizations and say, you know, for instance, we have this value on the wall of inclusion. And because of what's happened in the world, I've come to terms with the fact that I haven't lived that value as fully as I could. So again, to reveal with some courage, a bit of vulnerability, it is immensely trust building to be able to show people that you've had a shift in perspective, because people are interested in the real leader. They're not interested in the person who is saying one thing and behaving in another way. I mean, and ultimately that's your power as a leader. The more you can align what you say and how you behave and your deep belief system with the way you show up in the workplace, in the way you would show up with your community or for your family, that is what engages people, right? I mean, we've heard the line, people, are hired into organizations, but they leave because of bad bosses. And you can go from being a bad boss to a good boss by showing a bit of vulnerability and authenticity. And again, it's a daily practice. Self-actualization is not a pill you swallow or a mountain you sit on for one day. It is a day-to-day, who do I want to be? And how do I want to show up?
Well, Lisa, you and I could probably go on and on and on, because we have
I
such
agree.
the same kind of beliefs around leadership. And thank you so much for your time. Is there anything you want to say before I let you go?
Just to you, Roxanne, you have made a decision to be someone. I don't know if you know the term bodhisattva, right? There are people who will delay their entry into enlightenment to help other people get there ahead of them. And I think the work that you do is really, you're creating a pathway for people to enter into states of reflection that are not naturally easy for many people, but the way in which you do it makes it feel possible and a little less scary. So I just want to thank you for, this conversation, but beyond that, the way that you're devoting your professional life to making some pretty significant change in organizations. So thank you.
Thanks you so much for those kind words. So for anyone listening, and especially if you're a leader, you have such an opportunity, regardless of what your leadership style has been in the past, to create change. So if you're already thinking about it, that's fantastic. But if you're not, start to think about what changes can I, you said stop, continue, start and continue in your leadership, so to create the changes that you need to make. So for everyone listening, if you're wanting to know more about authentic leadership, you can reach me at roxannederhodge.com. And again, Lisa, thanks so much for your time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Great. Thank you, Roxanne.
Thanks for tuning in to Authentic Living with Roxanne, creating the space for positive, healthy change. Roxanne is a keynote speaker, psychotherapist, and coach. To work with Roxanne, visit roxannederhodge.com/blueprint. We'll see you next time on Authentic Living with Roxanne.